My name is Carol, I'm 68 years old. And my own daughter stood by and watched as her mother-in-law slapped me across the face on my own front porch. Before I tell you about the day I finally called my lawyer and turned their entire world upside down, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It helps to know you're not alone when you're going through hell. The sting blossomed across my cheek, hot and shameful. The sound of it, a sharp, ugly crack, seemed to hang in the crisp October air. A sound that didn't belong among the rustling leaves and quiet hum of our peaceful Oak Park street. My daughter Emily just stood there frozen, her face a pale mask of horror. Her husband, Mark, stared at the ground as if he could will himself to disappear. But Eleanor, his mother, didn't flinch. She looked at me, her eyes cold and triumphant, a smug little smile playing on her lips. "You old fool," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You should have just done what you were told." A strange calm washed over me. The burning in my cheek faded, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. This was it. This was the line. For years I had bitten my tongue. I had swallowed my pride. I had made excuses for the disrespect, for the subtle manipulations, for the way they chipped away at my dignity piece by piece. All for my daughter. But this was different. To understand how we got here, how my own front porch became a battlefield, we have to go back 3 days to the Tuesday morning that changed everything. I was sitting in my kitchen, the one my late husband Frank and I had remodeled the year before he passed. I was enjoying my second cup of coffee, looking out at the maple tree in the backyard, its leaves a brilliant blaze of red and gold. It was quiet, peaceful, the kind of morning I had come to cherish in my widowhood. Then the doorbell rang. Not a friendly little chime, but a long, insistent press that sent a jolt of irritation through me. I opened the door to a sight that made my heart stop. It was Emily, Mark, and Eleanor, standing on my welcome mat surrounded by a mountain of luggage. Not just a weekend bag or two. I'm talking about 2 massive rolling suitcases, duffel bags, and a cascade of shopping bags from expensive department stores. They looked like they were moving in. "Mom," Emily said, her voice strained. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Eleanor, however, pushed past her and marched into my foyer like she owned the place. A cloud of her overpowering, expensive perfume filled the air. A scent that screamed of money and entitlement. It was an invasion. "Carol, dear," she said, that smile of hers all teeth and no warmth. "So good to see you. We have some wonderful news." Wonderful news didn't usually arrive with 6 pieces of luggage, and the panicked look I saw on my daughter's face. They shuffled into my kitchen, the room suddenly feeling small and crowded. I put on another pot of coffee, my hands moving on autopilot while my mind raced. What was going on? Did something happen to their house? A fire? A flood? Emily sat at the kitchen table, nervously twisting the napkin in her hands. Mark stood behind her, his posture stiff and uncomfortable. Eleanor, of course, sat down in Frank's old chair at the head of the table, as if it were her throne. "Well, spit it out," I said, my patience wearing thin. Emily took a shaky breath. "Mom, we sold the house." The coffee pot felt heavy in my hand. I set it down with a thud. "You what?" "We sold the house in Naperville," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. That house was more than just wood and nails. It was the nest Frank and I had helped them build. We had drained a significant portion of our retirement savings to give them the $40,000 down payment, a gift to secure their future, to give our future grandchildren a place to grow up safe and sound. And, Eleanor cut in, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness, "We got a fantastic price. $630,000. She said the number slowly, savoring each syllable as if it were a delicious secret. My blood ran cold. That was their entire life savings, their security, everything they had. Before I could even ask what their plan was, where they were going to live, Eleanor delivered the final devastating blow. "And Emily was so smart," she cooed, reaching over to pat my daughter's hand. "She gave the entire sum to me. I have a once-in-a-lifetime real estate opportunity. We're going to double it in 6 months." I stared at my daughter, my only child. Her face was ashen. She finally looked up at me, her eyes pleading for what? Forgiveness? Understanding? She had taken the foundation of her family's future, a future her own father had sacrificed for, and handed it over to this viper. "So," Eleanor said, leaning back in Frank's chair and looking around my kitchen, We'll just need to stay here for a few months. It won't be long at all. Her words hung in the air. An impossible demand. I looked from her smug face to my daughter's terrified one. My entire body went numb. I opened my mouth to speak, to scream, to demand they get out of my house, but no words came out. It was in that moment, seeing the diamond bracelet glittering on Eleanor's wrist, a bracelet I had never seen before, that I knew this wasn't an investment. It was a heist, and they expected me to be their safe house. I looked straight at Eleanor, my mind racing, 1,000 angry responses fighting to get out. The silence stretched on, thick with tension. She thought she had me cornered. She thought I would just roll over like I always did. She had no idea that the no forming on my lips wasn't just a word. It was a declaration of war. I looked at the three of them, these unwelcome invaders in my kitchen. Eleanor, smug and expectant in my late husband's chair. Mark, my son-in-law, looking anywhere but at me, his shoulders hunched in shame. And Emily, my daughter, my flesh and blood, looking like a cornered animal. The air was thick with their lies and my unspoken fury. My home, my sanctuary, which I had guarded so carefully since Frank's funeral, had been breached. Let me get this straight, I said, my voice dangerously low and steady, each word a carefully placed stone. You sold your house, the home my husband and I helped you buy. You handed over $630,000 of your family's money to her. I gestured with my chin toward Eleanor, refusing to grant her the dignity of her name. For some vague investment, and now you want to live here? It's just for a few months, Mom, really? Emily pleaded, her voice cracking. Until the profits come in. Eleanor says it's a sure thing. She's been working on this for years. A sure thing, I repeated flatly. My eyes flickered to Eleanor's wrist, to the flashing diamonds on her new bracelet, then to the silk scarf knotted at her throat. These were not the accessories of a woman waiting for an investment to pay off. These were trophies. I'm sure it is. Eleanor let out a delicate, condescending laugh that grated on my nerves like nails on a chalkboard. Carol, darling, you wouldn't understand these things. This is the world of high-stakes finance, not clipping coupons for the grocery store. This is about securing their future, something you and Frank, bless his heart, were clearly never able to do properly. A hot flash of pure, unadulterated rage crawled up my neck. To mention Frank, to twist his memory, his sacrifice, into an insult in his own kitchen. It took every ounce of my self-control not to throw the scalding coffee pot at her perfectly coiffed head. Frank and I gave you the down payment for that house, I said, my words like chips of ice. $40,000. That was a significant part of your inheritance given early so you could build a life. We secured your start. We gave you a foundation. A start. Eleanor sniffed dismissively, waving her hand as if shooing away a fly. A tiny little plot of land in the suburbs. I'm giving them the world, Carol. A world you can't even imagine. I knew I couldn't reason with Eleanor. She was a brick wall of arrogance and greed. I had to get through to my daughter. I turned my full attention to Emily. And where are all your things? I asked, my voice softer now, trying to find the scared, sensible girl I had raised. Your furniture? The wedding china? Your photo albums? What about your father's old leather armchair I gave you after the funeral? Emily flinched as if I'd struck her. It's in storage, she mumbled, her eyes darting to the floor. We packed everything up. A very expensive climate-controlled storage unit, I might add. Mark chimed in, finally finding his voice. It was weak and reedy, desperate for validation. Cost us nearly $1,000 just for the first month's deposit. Top of the line. He said it with a pathetic hint of pride, as if wasting money was a sign of success. So they were already bleeding money, hemorrhaging it on non-essentials while their entire net worth was in Eleanor's hands. My eyes narrowed. That's when I noticed it. A crisp manila file folder peeking out from under a stack of magazines on the counter where they'd dropped their bags. It had the logo of a prominent national bank on it, the kind that deals with wealth management. What's that? I asked, my voice casual as I walked toward it. Emily leaped up from her chair with a speed that startled me, snatching the folder away before I could get within 3 feet of it. Nothing. Just personal papers. Business stuff, she stammered, clutching it to her chest like a shield. Her panic was a blaring, screaming alarm bell in my head. What was she hiding so desperately? A statement showing a zero balance? Loan documents? I had to know. Just then, Mark's phone buzzed loudly on the counter. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and his face went tight. "Excuse me, I have to take this," he muttered, scurrying out into the hallway as if escaping a fire. He didn't close the kitchen door all the way. He thought he was being quiet, but in the tense silence of the kitchen, his voice carried. It was a low, urgent whisper. Yeah, the final transfer goes through tomorrow morning. No, don't worry, she doesn't suspect a thing. She's just a little emotional. Just make sure everything is ready on your end for the final step." There was a pause. I could hear the faint, tinny sound of another voice on the line. "Look, I know it's a lot, but Eleanor promised. She showed us the projections. We just have to trust her." He hung up and came back into the kitchen, forcing a wide, unnatural smile. "Just work," he said a little too brightly. "Big project. I'm up for a huge promotion, you know? The new salary would be a game changer." I just nodded slowly, my face an impassive mask, but inside my mind was racing, fitting the pieces together. Final transfer. Tomorrow morning. Final step. She doesn't suspect a thing. They weren't just liars, they were clumsy, arrogant ones. While they saw me as a dotty old woman, a convenient landing pad for their schemes, I saw them with perfect, horrifying clarity. A fool, a coward, and a predator. The silence in the kitchen was heavy, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall, a clock that felt like it was counting down to my family's complete financial annihilation. I hadn't given them an answer yet. They were all watching me, waiting. They thought the question was whether they could stay. But the real question, the one screaming in my head, was how fast I could get them out. I looked at the folder Emily was still hugging to her chest and made a decision. I had to see what was in it, no matter what it took. That evening was one of the longest and most surreal of my life. I made a simple dinner of chicken soup and sandwiches because it was all I could manage without my hands shaking. The food tasted like cardboard, like ash in my mouth. They sat at my table in my home and tried to act like everything was normal. It was a grotesque parody of a family meal. Emily chattered nervously, filling the silence with meaningless gossip about old high school friends I hadn't thought about in 20 years. "And remember Jennifer Smith? She got a divorce. Her husband ran off with his yoga instructor. Can you believe it?" She laughed, a high, brittle sound that didn't reach her eyes. Mark talked about the Chicago Bears, dissecting their last game with a false enthusiasm that was painful to watch. "If only the quarterback had a better offensive line," he lamented, shaking his head as if it were the most important problem in the world. Eleanor, meanwhile, conducted a silent, critical tour of my living room from her seat at the table. Her eyes roamed over everything, lingering on the scuffs on the hardwood floor, the slight fading on the floral armchair, the collection of ceramic birds I kept on the windowsill. I felt like my entire life was being appraised by a particularly harsh antiques dealer and being found wanting. "You know, Carol," she said, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth. She gestured toward the mantel, where a framed photo of me and Frank on our 25th anniversary stood. We were in Hawaii, tanned and laughing with lace around our necks. Frank always had such simple tastes. Very wholesome. It wasn't a compliment. It was an insult wrapped in a thin, poisonous veil of sympathy. I forced a tight smile and took a slow sip of water. "He valued things that last," I said, looking her straight in the eye. "Honesty. Loyalty. Things you can't buy in a department store." Her smile tightened for a fraction of a second before the mask of pleasantness slid back into place. After the pretense of dinner was over, I pleaded a splitting headache, which wasn't entirely a lie, and went upstairs to my room. But I wasn't going to sleep. I was going on a hunt. I lay in the dark, my door cracked open just enough to listen. I heard the murmur of the TV downstairs, the sharp, fake laughter from some sitcom. I heard the creak of the floorboards as they moved around my house. A house that suddenly felt alien, occupied by strangers. I waited until I heard their footsteps come up the stairs, the soft closing of the guest room door. I gave it another hour, until the house was completely dark and silent, sinking into the deep quiet of a suburban midnight. Then I crept back downstairs, my bare feet silent on the runner. Just as I'd hoped, Emily had left the bank folder on the end table by the couch, probably thinking it was safe. My heart hammered against my ribs as I approached it. This felt wrong, like a violation of my daughter's privacy, a betrayal of her trust. But then I thought of Frank, of the way Eleanor had dismissed his memory, of the $40,000 he had worked so hard for, and the cold fury returned. They had betrayed me first. They had betrayed his trust. My hands trembled slightly as I slid the documents from the folder under the dim light of the street lamp coming through the window. It wasn't what I expected. It wasn't a bank statement showing a zero balance. It was so much worse. The top document was a loan application. A high-interest, unsecured personal loan for $50,000. It was in Emily and Mark's names, signed just last week. The purpose of the loan, listed in cold, black, impersonal type, was home renovations. A blatant lie. They didn't even have a home anymore. They were already in debt up to their eyeballs, and they were borrowing more at a predatory rate. But why? Then I saw the second document tucked behind the application, and the breath left my body in a rush. It was a wire transfer confirmation. The paper was still crisp. A transfer of $50,000, sent 2 days ago. The recipient was a corporation I'd never heard of, EVM Enterprises LLC. It took me a second, my sleep-deprived brain struggling to connect the dots. V.M. Eleanor. Victoria. Mark. Eleanor's full name was Eleanor Victoria Maxwell. They hadn't just given her money. They had formed a shell company with her. And my daughter and her husband had just funneled borrowed money. Money they didn't have, directly into it. I felt physically sick, a sour taste rising in my throat. This wasn't just a bad investment. It was a premeditated, systematic draining of their finances. Eleanor wasn't just taking the money from the house sale. She was taking everything else she could get her hands on. I carefully put the papers back in the folder, my mind reeling. What was this money for? Covering old gambling debts from her past in Vegas? Funding a lavish lifestyle? I didn't know the specifics, but I knew it was dirty. As I stood there in the dark, the moonlight slanting across the floor, I heard a floorboard creak upstairs. I froze, my body rigid with adrenaline. Footsteps, soft and slow, were coming down the stairs. I quickly shoved the folder back exactly where I found it and flattened myself against the wall in the deep shadows of the dining room archway, my heart pounding in my ears. It was Emily. She tiptoed into the living room, her silhouette framed by the window. She didn't turn on a light. She just went to the end table and her hand hovered over the folder for a second, checking to make sure it was there, untouched. Satisfied, she turned and went into the kitchen. I heard the refrigerator open, the clink of a glass. She was just getting a drink of water, but she had come down to check on the evidence. She knew it was damning. She was a conspirator. I waited until I heard her soft footsteps retreat up the stairs before I let out the breath I was holding. The anger I felt was now laced with a profound, aching sadness. My daughter, the girl I had taught to be honest and responsible, was a willing participant in her own financial ruin. She was lying to me, hiding things from me, all at the direction of that venomous woman sleeping in my guest room. I stood in the darkness for a long time, the weight of it all pressing down on me. I thought that was the worst of it. I was so wrong. The next morning, as I tried to process the depth of the deception, Frank's memory echoed in my head. A faint whisper at first, then a roar. He had been so careful, so meticulous. He never trusted Eleanor. He always said, "Always keep a paper trail, Carol. It's the only thing that can't lie." And then it hit me like a bolt of lightning. The blue folder. The next morning I was up before the sun, fueled by a sleepless night of rage and a new desperate sense of purpose. While the invaders slept upstairs in my guest room, I went down to the small, tidy office Frank had built in the basement. It was my least favorite room in the house now. It still smelled faintly of his Old Spice aftershave and the pipe tobacco he'd given up years before he passed. It was a room frozen in time, a museum of a man I missed every single day. But this morning it was a sanctuary, an armory. I went straight to the old metal filing cabinet in the corner, the one that held all our important life documents. Wills, deeds, car titles, insurance policies. My fingers, surprisingly steady, traced the neatly typed labels until I found it. Emily Home. My hand was shaking as I pulled out the thick, royal blue file folder. I carried it back to the kitchen like a sacred text and sat down at the table, the same table where my world had been turned upside down less than 24 hours earlier. I opened it, and it was like Frank was right there with me. His presence a comforting weight beside me. His neat, precise, all-caps handwriting was on every tab. He had kept impeccable records of everything. And there it was right on top, preserved in a plastic sleeve. A notarized document, a copy of the $40,000 cashier's check we had given them for the down payment on the Naperville house. Stapled to it was a promissory note. My breath caught in my throat. I had completely forgotten the details, remembering only the joy of helping them, the pride on Emily's face at the closing. In the haze of grief after Frank died, so many practical details had blurred. But Frank hadn't forgotten. Even in his generosity, he had been a pragmatist. He had protected us. It wasn't a gift, it was a loan. A formal, legally binding loan. The terms were simple and kind. The loan was to be repaid in full, without interest, upon the sale or transfer of the property. It was the kindness of a father who didn't want to burden his daughter with monthly payments, but the foresight of a man who knew the value of a dollar. Emily and Mark's signatures were at the bottom, clear as day, right next to Frank's. They knew. They had known all along this money was owed to me, their widowed mother. It was part of my inheritance from my husband, money I needed for my own future. But that wasn't the masterstroke. That wasn't the part that made me gasp aloud in the silent kitchen. Tucked behind the promissory note was another document. A single page typed on heavy legal paper, titled Private Agreement. My eyes scanned the dense jargon, and then the words leaped out at me as if they were printed in neon. Frank had insisted on this clause, drawn up by our old family lawyer. It explicitly stated that the property at their Naperville address could not be sold, transferred, or used as collateral for another loan without the $40,000 debt to me, Carol Peterson, being settled in full first. The clause effectively gave me lien holder rights. They had not only failed to repay me, they had broken a legally binding contract that was tied to the deed itself. They hadn't just sold their house, they had sold it illegally. I remembered the argument now. Frank and I had discussed it. I had thought it was unnecessary, a bit mistrustful. "She's our daughter, Frank," I had said. And he had replied, "It's not her I'm worried about, Carol. It's that mother of his. That woman looks at people like they're items in an auction." He'd seen it. All those years ago. He had seen Eleanor for exactly who she was. I felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy. This was it. This was the leverage I needed. This piece of paper wasn't just a contract. It was my shield and my sword. I sat there, clutching the documents, tears finally blurring my vision. They were tears of grief for my brilliant, wonderful husband, tears of overwhelming gratitude for his foresight, and tears of cold, hard rage at my daughter's utter betrayal of his memory. "What are you doing?" The voice, sharp and panicked, cut through my thoughts. I jumped, startled. Emily was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, her hair a mess, wearing a borrowed robe of mine. Her eyes were wide with alarm. Her gaze dropped from my face to the blue folder open on the table. She saw the cashier's check, the promissory note, the damning title of the private agreement. The color drained from her face. She looked like she had seen a ghost. And in a way she had. The ghost of her father's prudence had come back to haunt her. "I remember now," I said, my voice steady and clear, all the tremor gone. "I remember everything." She didn't say anything. She just stared at the papers, her mouth opening and closing silently like a fish. The confident, dismissive daughter of yesterday was gone. In her place was a terrified child who had just been caught red-handed in a crime she thought was long buried. She knew what I had. She knew what it meant. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a desperate, frantic plea. But it was too late for pleading. Her actions, her lies, her complicity with that monster upstairs had burned away all my sympathy. The time for quiet disappointment was over. The time for action had begun. And I knew exactly what my first move would be. The confrontation I had been rehearsing in my head all night happened with an abrupt, ugly finality. Mark and Eleanor came downstairs a few minutes later, drawn by the suffocating silence. They found us locked in a standoff across the kitchen table, me with the blue folder open in front of me like a judge's docket, Emily pale and trembling, looking like she was about to faint. "What in God's name is going on?" Eleanor demanded, her eyes immediately flicking to the papers, her internal radar for trouble screaming. "What is that?" "This," I said, my voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even me, is my husband's final gift to me. This is proof that my daughter and son-in-law are not only ungrateful, they're also thieves and criminals. I tapped the private agreement with my index finger. The sound a sharp report in the quiet room. Mark went ashen. He shuffled over and peered at the document, his face crumbling as he read the familiar legal language. "Oh God," he whispered, running a hand through his hair. "Carol, I completely forgot all about this." "Forgot?" I laughed, a harsh, bitter, ugly sound that came from the depths of my soul. You don't forget signing a legal document that prevents you from selling your home. You don't forget a $40,000 debt to your widowed mother-in-law. You ignore it. You willfully disregard it. You hoped I would forget, that I'd be too lost in my grief to remember the details. "It was a mistake, Mom," Emily finally choked out, tears beginning to well in her eyes. "We were just so excited about Eleanor's investment. We got carried away." She said it was time-sensitive. Carried away? My voice rose, the dam of my composure finally breaking. A torrent of righteous anger pouring out. "You got carried away with my money. With your father's legacy. The money he worked 60 hours a week for. The money meant to keep me safe in my old age. You threw it all away on her get-rich-quick scheme without a single thought for me. Now you listen here," Eleanor snapped, stepping forward, her face a mask of indignation. She placed herself between me and Emily, a human shield of deceit. "You will not speak about my legitimate business ventures that way. And you will not upset my son. This is just a simple misunderstanding between family, and your hysterics are not helping." "This is not a misunderstanding," I said, my voice dropping back to a low, dangerous calm as I stood up to face her. "This is fraud. This is theft. And it ends now. I want you all out of my house." The words hung in the air, final and irrevocable. "You can't be serious," Emily cried, the tears now streaming down her face in earnest. "Mom, please. We have nowhere to go. The money. It's all tied up. We don't have anything left." "That sounds like you problem," I said, the words tasting like ice. "Not a me problem. You made your bed with her. Now you can lie in it. You selfish, bitter old woman," Eleanor shrieked, her mask of civility finally shattering completely, revealing the ugly, grasping face beneath. "After everything we've done for you, letting you be a part of our lives. Done for me." I was incredulous. The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. "You have done nothing but bring chaos and deceit and the stench of your greed into my home." I started walking purposefully toward the front door, my stride firm. "Get your things. Now." They followed me into the foyer, a chaotic jumble of pleading and threats. The argument spilled out onto the front porch as I held the door open. The crisp October air a welcome relief from the toxic atmosphere inside. I lived on a quiet street of well-kept lawns and friendly neighbors. I could see my neighbor, Brenda, across the way, pausing her morning walk to watch the commotion, her expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. I didn't care. Let the whole world see them for who they were. "You can't kick us out," Mark pleaded, his voice cracking. "We're family. Think of the custody battle we could have one day." The out-of-place threat was so absurd it barely registered. "Family doesn't steal from family," I shot back. "Family doesn't lie. Family doesn't commit fraud." "You will regret this, Carol," Eleanor snarled, her face contorted with a rage that made her ugly. She stepped right up to me, her expensive perfume a nauseating cloud around me, invading my personal space. "I will make sure you end up in a sad, lonely nursing home, forgotten by everyone. I will tell everyone you've lost your mind." "Get off my property," I said, my voice shaking but firm. And that's when it happened. In a flash of vicious movement, Eleanor drew back her hand and slapped me hard across the face. The crack of the impact echoed in the quiet morning air. My head snapped to the side, my cheek erupting in a blaze of pain and utter humiliation. Across the street, Brenda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Emily screamed, a thin, helpless, useless sound. Mark just stared, his jaw hanging open in stupid shock. For a long, ringing moment, all I could feel was the sting on my skin and the crushing weight of my daughter's inaction. She just stood there. She did nothing. She didn't step between us. She didn't yell at her mother-in-law. She just watched. That silence, that paralysis hurt more than the slap. But then the white-hot pain sharpened into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. The shock cleared from my mind, replaced by an absolute, chilling certainty about what I had to do next. Eleanor was still sneering at me, her chest heaving. She thought she had won. She thought she had silenced me with brute force. She had no idea what she had just unleashed. I slowly turned my head back to face her. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I met her gaze, and I let her see the absolute absence of fear in my eyes. I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out my cell phone. Her sneer faltered, a flicker of confusion, then alarm in her eyes. I scrolled through my contacts, my finger steady and deliberate, and pressed the call button on the number listed under D. I put the phone to my ear, my eyes locked on Eleanor's, watching the color drain from her face. "Yes, hello," I said, my voice as calm and clear as a winter morning. "Mr. Davies, please. This is Carol Peterson. Tell him it's time. It's time to start the proceedings." The change in the atmosphere on my front porch was instantaneous and absolute. The name of my lawyer, spoken so calmly into the phone, acted like a bucket of ice water thrown over the scene. Eleanor's smug, triumphant expression dissolved into a mask of slack-jawed disbelief, which quickly morphed into fear. Real palpable fear. Mark stumbled back a step as if I'd physically pushed him, his eyes wide with panic. Emily let out a choked sob, the sound of a trapped animal, finally understanding that this wasn't a family squabble anymore. This was not something she could cry her way out of. This was war. "You wouldn't dare," Eleanor stammered, her voice losing its venomous edge and taking on a thin, reedy quality. "You're bluffing." "I just did," I said, ending the call and sliding the phone back into my apron pocket with a sense of finality. "My lawyer will be filing an emergency injunction this morning for fraud, breach of contract, and now, thanks to you, civil assault. Now for the last time, get off my property before I have you removed for trespassing." Without another word, they scrambled. It was a pathetic, chaotic sight. They grabbed the bags they'd left in the foyer and practically ran to their car, a late-model luxury SUV that was no doubt paid for with a piece of my daughter's future. They threw the luggage in the back with a series of loud thuds and screeched away from the curb, leaving a trail of burning rubber and shattered relationships in their wake. I stood on the porch for a long time, my cheek throbbing, my heart aching with a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight. But my resolve was as firm as the oak tree in my front yard. Brenda cautiously came over from her yard, her face etched with concern. "Carol, are you okay? I saw the whole thing. That woman is a monster. Do you want me to call the police?" "Thank you, Brenda, but I've already called my lawyer." "That's a much bigger hammer," I said, managing a weak smile. Her simple, human decency was a small comfort in the storm. I assured her I was fine and went back inside, locking the deadbolt firmly behind me. The click of the lock was one of the most satisfying sounds I had ever heard. The silence in my house was a profound relief. The lingering scent of Eleanor's perfume was the only evidence they had ever been there. I went to the kitchen and scrubbed the countertops, washed the coffee mugs they'd used, and threw out the leftover food. I was cleansing my space, erasing them. I spent the rest of the day in a focus daze, speaking at length with Mr. Davies, and giving him a full, detailed account, including the assault I had just endured with a witness. He was calm, methodical, and radiated a quiet fury on my behalf. He told me to sit tight while he prepared the initial filings and warned me that Eleanor would likely retaliate. 2 days later, just as I was starting to feel a semblance of control again, the next attack came. It was far more insidious, far more dangerous than a slap. A woman with a kind, professional face and a government ID badge knocked on my door. Her name was Ms. Jenkins, from the Illinois Department on Aging's Adult Protective Services Division. "Mrs. Peterson," she said gently, but with an unmistakable air of authority, "we received an anonymous tip concerning your welfare. The caller expressed serious concern that you may be experiencing some cognitive decline, that you seem confused and paranoid, and are being financially exploited by your lawyer." I was floored. The words didn't compute at first. It felt like the ground had dropped out from under me, plunging me into a nightmare. I stared at her, speechless, my hand gripping the doorframe. An anonymous tip. I knew exactly who it was from. Eleanor. Of course. This was her countermove. She was a cornered rat, and she was biting back with everything she had. She couldn't win with facts or the law, so she was trying to destroy my credibility, to paint me as a confused, senile old woman who couldn't be trusted. It was a brilliant, evil, and terrifyingly effective strategy. If she could get me declared incompetent, any legal action I took would be nullified. My testimony would be worthless. My contracts would be void. They could take everything. There must be some mistake. I finally managed to say, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to control it. I'm sure there is, Ms. Jenkins said, her eyes full of a professional sympathy that felt more chilling than comforting. But I do have to follow procedure. It's for your own protection. May I come in and ask you a few questions? I felt a surge of cold, nauseating panic. This was a nightmare. Here I was, the victim of a massive fraud, and suddenly I was the one under investigation. Eleanor was trying to use the very system designed to protect vulnerable seniors like me as a weapon against me. I could see the whole ugly scenario playing out in my head. Forced evaluations, psychological tests, court-appointed guardians stripping me of my right to make my own decisions about my life, my finances, my home. She wasn't just trying to win a lawsuit. She was trying to erase me. But as I stood there in my doorway, looking at this well-meaning woman who held my future in her hands, the panic subsided, burned away by that same cold, hard anger from the porch. Eleanor had underestimated me again. She thought I was just an emotional old woman who would crumble under pressure. She had no idea I was Frank Peterson's wife. And Frank had taught me how to document everything, how to be organized, how to fight. Of course, Ms. Jenkins, I said, my voice suddenly firm again. I stepped back and opened the door wider, a new plan already forming in my mind. Please come in. I have a feeling you and I have a lot to talk about. And I have some things I need to show you. I led her into my living room, my mind already working, formulating a new plan of attack. Eleanor wanted to play dirty. Fine. I would show her just how prepared I was. I just prayed it would be enough to cut through the red tape of bureaucracy before Eleanor could do any more damage. The next day, I drove down to Mr. Davies's office in the heart of Chicago's Loop. The towering glass and steel buildings and the bustling streets were a stark contrast to the quiet, simmering turmoil of my life. His office was on the 40th floor, a space of dark wood, leather-bound books, and a panoramic view of Lake Michigan that radiated power and authority. It was exactly what I needed. I needed to feel powerful. I brought the blue folder, now my Bible, and the business card Ms. Jenkins had left with me from Adult Protective Services. Mr. Davies, a man in his late 50s with sharp gray eyes and a reassuringly calm demeanor, listened without interruption as I laid out the entire story, from the moment they arrived on my doorstep with their mountain of luggage to the chilling visit from APS. When I finished, he leaned back in his high-backed leather chair, which sighed under his weight, and steepled his fingers, his expression grim. "Carol, this is vile," he said, his voice a low rumble of controlled anger. "This move with APS is a classic, disgusting tactic of a financial predator. They isolate the victim, they create chaos, they discredit them with accusations of dementia or paranoia, and then they swoop in and seize control under the guise of helping. Eleanor is not an amateur. This is calculated. So what do we do?" I asked, my voice tight with an anxiety that had been my constant companion for days. "Can she actually do this? Can they force me to be evaluated?" "They can try," he said, "but they will fail spectacularly. We're going to fight back with overwhelming, undeniable force." He picked up the private agreement that Frank had insisted on, handling it with a reverence that warmed my heart. "This is our primary weapon. It's ironclad. The sale of the house was unequivocally fraudulent. We can file an emergency injunction this morning to freeze the assets from the sale, wherever they may be." He then looked at the promissory note. "And this is a straightforward breach of contract. We will sue for the $40,000. And we won't stop there. We'll add 9 years of accrued interest as stipulated by state law for unpaid loans. And of course, they will be responsible for every single penny of my legal fees." He paused, his sharp eyes narrowing in thought. "But the real story, the one that will lead to criminal charges, is where the rest of the money went. You mentioned a wire transfer to EVM Enterprises LLC? I nodded, explaining what I had found in the bank folder in the dead of night. A grim, satisfied smile touched Mr. Davies's lips. My paralegal has been doing some digging since we spoke yesterday. It seems Eleanor Victoria Maxwell has a history. She left a trail of unpaid debts in Las Vegas a decade ago. Mostly gambling markers at high-end casinos and unpaid loans to private lenders. She declared bankruptcy to get out of it, but it seems she's found a new source of income. Her own family. He swiveled his large computer monitor around to face me. EVM Enterprises was registered as a domestic LLC in Delaware just 2 months ago. The registered agent is a shell corporation. It's a ghost company, a classic tool for money laundering, designed to make large sums of cash disappear. It was all starting to make sense. A horrifying tapestry of greed and deceit. This wasn't a one-time bad investment my daughter had fallen for. It was a carefully constructed plan to steal her inheritance and any other money she could get her hands on. So the money from the sale is gone? I asked, a wave of despair washing over me. The money for any future grandchildren's college fund, their security. It's all just vanished? Not necessarily, Mr. Davies said, his voice firm and reassuring. Finding it will be difficult, especially if it's been moved offshore, but not impossible. The moment we get a court order for financial discovery, we can follow the trail. They always leave a trail. But first things first. We need to shut down this despicable APS investigation and go on the offensive. He explained his strategy. We would combine everything into one massive, unavoidable lawsuit. Fraud, breach of contract, civil assault for the slap on my porch, and intentional infliction of emotional distress for the malicious APS report. We would also file for an immediate temporary restraining order against Eleanor. I need you to do one more thing for me, Carol, he said, leaning forward, his gaze intense. You mentioned your husband was very meticulous. The lawyer who drew up this private agreement. You said his name was Abernathy? Is he still around? I thought for a moment, picturing the kind, elderly man. Yes, Henry Abernathy. He was an old friend of Frank's. He must be in his 80s by now, but I think his firm is still downtown. Good, Mr. Davies said, making a note on a legal pad. An affidavit from him confirming the intent and validity of this document would be invaluable. Go see him. Today. See if he remembers anything specific about the signing. Anything about Eleanor's attitude at the time. Sometimes the smallest details, the oldest memories, can crack a case wide open. I left his office an hour later feeling like I had an army at my back. The fear was still there. A cold knot in the pit of my stomach, but now it was overshadowed by a burning sense of purpose. Eleanor had tried to portray me as a confused, helpless old woman. But I had a top-tier lawyer, a mountain of evidence provided by my brilliant husband, and a righteous fury that was getting hotter by the minute. My next stop was Mr. Abernathy's office. I had a feeling the story was about to get even darker and more twisted. Mr. Abernathy's law firm wasn't in a sleek downtown skyscraper like Mr. Davies's. It was housed in a charming old brownstone in Lincoln Park, the kind of place with creaky wooden floors, walls lined with books that smelled of old paper and leather, and a sense of quiet, enduring dignity. Mr. Abernathy himself was exactly as I remembered him, though grayer and a bit more stooped with age. He was 85, he told me with a proud twinkle in his eye, but still came into the office 3 days a week to keep his mind sharp and his partners honest. His eyes, behind thick spectacles, were as bright and alert as ever. He remembered me and Frank immediately, and his face softened with a genuine warmth that was a balm to my frayed nerves. Carol Peterson, he said, taking my hand in his 2 dry, papery ones. It's been too long, my dear. I was so terribly sorry to hear about Frank. He was a good man. A smart, honorable man. They don't make many like him anymore. I sat in a worn, comfortable leather chair across from his massive oak desk as he put on his reading glasses. I explained the situation, my voice low and steady as I recounted the ugly series of events. I handed him the copies of the documents from the blue folder. He read through them slowly, his brow furrowed in concentration, occasionally letting out a soft hum of interest. I remember this, he said finally, tapping the private agreement with a long bony finger. I remember it distinctly. Frank was adamant. He came to see me alone a week or so before the closing. He sat in that very chair you're sitting in now. He said, Henry, I don't trust my daughter's future mother-in-law as far as I can throw her. That woman has dollar signs in her eyes. I want a fail-safe. Something to protect Carol if I'm not around to do it. Hearing Frank's words spoken aloud after so many years brought a fresh lump to my throat. Even then, when he was healthy and strong, he had been looking out for me, planning for a future he wouldn't be in. This document is perfectly legal and absolutely enforceable, Mr. Abernathy confirmed, his tone professional and firm. Their closing attorney for the recent sale should have caught this during the title search. It would have appeared as a cloud on the title. For them to proceed without satisfying this condition is a serious breach of professional ethics, at best, and outright collusion at worst. He leaned back, taking off his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. He was quiet for a long, uncomfortable moment, a troubled look clouding his features. Carol, he began, his voice hesitant as if weighing a heavy decision. There's something else. Something I probably should have told you years ago, but it felt like overstepping, like stirring up trouble in your family. But now I see I should have. I waited, my body tense, my hands gripping the arms of the chair. A few years after the original closing, he continued, his voice dropping lower, Eleanor Maxwell made an appointment to see me. Alone. She came here, sat in that very chair, dressed to the nines and dripping with charm. She said she was helping Emily and Mark plan their long-term financial future, and was just reviewing all their documents as a helpful mother-in-law would. She asked specifically about this private agreement. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a recent scheme. The seeds had been planted long ago. She tried to downplay it, he said, his voice now filled with an old, simmering indignation. She called it a silly bit of paper and said things like, Frank was always such a worrier, wasn't he? So overprotective. And of course you and I know this is just a family matter, not something that would ever actually be used in a legal sense. She was testing me. She was feeling me out, seeing if I was a man who could be persuaded. He leaned forward, his ancient eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that surprised me. And then she said something I have never forgotten. She leaned in as if sharing a secret and said, You know, Henry, in complicated family situations like this, with all the emotions involved, sometimes paperwork can get misplaced. It would be a terrible tragedy if such an important document were to get lost in a fire or a flood, wouldn't it? I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. The audacity, the sheer, cold-blooded nerve of it. She had tried to bribe, or intimidate, a lawyer into helping her commit future fraud against his own friends. I told her in no uncertain terms, Mr. Abernathy said, his voice hard as steel, that my files are impeccable, fireproof, and that I take my duty as an officer of the court with the utmost seriousness. I told her the document was secure, and that any attempt to circumvent it would have severe legal consequences. She dropped the charming facade immediately, gave me a look that could curdle milk, and left in a huff. I never heard from her again, but I never forgot it. I knew then that Frank's instincts had been right on the money. That woman was a snake in the grass. He stood up stiffly and went to a large fireproof filing cabinet that looked like it had survived a war. After a moment of searching, he pulled out a thick, dusty file with my daughter's name on it. But here's the best part, Carol. Here is why your husband was a genius. He was extra cautious. He didn't just have us sign the agreement. He had it formally recorded and attached to the original deed paperwork held here, in my office. He wanted a sealed, notarized copy kept in my private vault, separate from the main files. He pulled out a crisp, sealed manila envelope, yellowed with age, bearing a heavy red wax seal with his firm's insignia. She could have stolen your copy. She could have tried to bribe a clerk to alter the public record. But she could never have gotten to this. This is the original, untouched and unimpeachable. He handed me the sealed envelope. It felt heavy in my hands, heavy with the weight of my husband's love, his protection, his foresight. This wasn't just a document anymore. This was irrefutable proof of Eleanor's long-term malicious intent. She hadn't just seized an opportunity. She had been planning to defraud my daughter and me for over a decade. The final piece of the puzzle had just clicked into place. Armed with the sealed envelope from Mr. Abernathy and a freshly sworn affidavit detailing Eleanor's decade-old attempt at witness tampering, I felt like a general preparing for a final decisive battle. I drove home from Mr. Abernathy's office not with fear, but with a cold, righteous fury. My next stop was to see my neighbor Brenda. She was a no-nonsense retired nurse in her early 70s with a sharp wit and an even sharper eye for neighborhood drama. When I told her I was taking formal legal action and that her testimony would be crucial, her face lit up with a grim satisfaction. "It's about damn time someone put that woman in her place," she said, ushering me into her tidy, sun-filled kitchen. She always looked down her nose at everyone on this block. "What do you need from me?" "You said you saw what happened," I began, sitting at her kitchen table. "Saw it?" she scoffed, pouring me a glass of iced tea without asking. "Honey, I have it on video. In high definition." My jaw dropped. I had been so consumed with my own shock that I had forgotten the modern world we live in. Brenda pointed to a small, discreet camera mounted next to her front door, cleverly disguised as part of the light fixture. "It's a doorbell camera. Records everything in a wide angle. My son, the tech wizard, installed it after those kids were stealing packages off porches last year. He says it's better than a guard dog." She pulled up the app on her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen with practiced ease. A few taps later, there it was. My front porch. My life. The video was shockingly clear, the audio crisp. It showed the whole ugly argument, starting from when I held the door open. It showed Eleanor getting in my face, jabbing her finger at me like a weapon. And then it showed the slap. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. It was a clear, unprovoked, and frankly brutal assault on a senior citizen. The video even captured the audio with perfect clarity, Eleanor's shriek of "selfish old woman," and my calm, clear voice telling Mr. Davies to start the proceedings. Watching it again from an outside perspective sent a fresh wave of shame and anger through me. "Brenda, this is everything," I whispered, my eyes glued to the screen, to the image of my own daughter standing by and doing nothing. "Send a copy to your lawyer," she said, already tapping away on her tablet. A moment later, my phone pinged with the video file. "And you tell him that Brenda Kowalski will be happy to testify in court. I'll wear my Sunday best and I won't mince a single word." I left Brenda's house feeling 10 feet tall and bulletproof. With her eyewitness testimony and that damning video, the assault charge was undeniable. My final task for the day was the one I dreaded most, but knew was critical: dealing with the lingering, poisonous threat of the APS investigation. I called Ms. Jenkins and invited her back to my home, telling her I had some information that would clarify the situation regarding the anonymous tip. She sounded wary but agreed to come that afternoon. When she arrived, I had everything laid out on my dining room table like a war room. I was no longer the frightened, trembling woman she had met 2 days ago. I was prepared. I had the blue folder. I had copies of the promissory note and the private agreement. I had the new, sealed envelope from Mr. Abernathy's office, a testament to Frank's foresight. I had the sworn affidavit from Mr. Abernathy detailing Eleanor's decade-old attempt to tamper with evidence. I had a printed, signed witness statement from Brenda. And for the grand finale, I had my laptop open and ready to play the video. "Miss Jenkins," I said calmly, gesturing for her to sit down. "You came here because of an anonymous tip suggesting I was incompetent and being exploited. I would like to show you who is really the exploiter here." I walked her through the documents one by one, my voice a steady, factual monotone. I explained the financial fraud, the stolen inheritance, the illegal house sale. Her professional, sympathetic expression slowly hardened into one of shock, then to one of unconcealed anger. She was a protector of the elderly, and she was realizing she had been used as a pawn by a predator. But it was the video that sealed it. "And finally," I said, "I'd like to show you the event that precipitated the anonymous call to your office." I turned the laptop to face her and clicked play. We watched the scene unfold in silence. When it got to the part where Eleanor slapped me, Ms. Jenkins let out an audible gasp, her hand flying to her chest. She made me play it again, her eyes narrowed, studying every detail, especially Emily's complete inaction. When it was over, she looked at me, her eyes filled with a profound apology and a steely resolve. "Mrs. Peterson, I am so deeply sorry you had to go through this. It is crystal clear to me what happened here. The anonymous call was a malicious, calculated, retaliatory act. It is a textbook tactic used to intimidate and silence a victim of elder abuse. She took out her official forms right then and there on my dining room table. I am closing this case effective immediately. The official finding will be unfounded and malicious. This report, along with my personal notes on the video evidence, will be sent to your lawyer. It will be admissible in your civil case. That woman tried to use my office as a weapon, and I will not stand for it. We will cooperate fully with any investigation the district attorney may pursue. She packed up her briefcase, her face set with determination. Thank you for being so strong and so organized, she said as she stood to leave. You're going to win this. You're going to make sure she never does this to anyone else. As I closed the door behind her, I finally allowed myself to feel a flicker of real hope. Eleanor had thrown her best punches. She had slapped me. She had tried to have me declared mentally incompetent. And I had blocked every single one. I had the evidence. I had the witnesses. I had the law on my side. All that was left was my day in court. And I was ready. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker, strangely silent and yet buzzing with unseen energy. The air was thick and still, heavy with unspoken tension and the smell of floor polish and anxiety. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Mr. Davies, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles were white. I had dressed carefully that morning, in a simple navy blue suit that had been Frank's favorite. I wanted to feel his strength with me. Across the aisle I saw them. Eleanor was dressed in a severe, expensive black suit, a somber and pious look plastered on her face, as if she were attending a funeral. In a way she was. Mark looked small and utterly defeated, his eyes red-rimmed and fixed on the scuffed toes of his shoes. And Emily, my heart broke all over again when I saw her. She was a ghost of herself, pale and painfully thin in a dress that hung off her frame. Dark circles stood out starkly under her eyes. She wouldn't look at me. She just stared at the polished wood of the table in front of her. The judge, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Judge Mendez, entered and called the court to order. The proceedings began. Their lawyer, a slick, overconfident man in a shiny suit, went first. He painted a picture of a simple family misunderstanding that had spiraled out of control. He spoke of a generous loan between a loving mother and daughter, a gift that I was now trying to claw back in my grief. He portrayed Eleanor as a savvy, benevolent matriarch simply trying to help her family get ahead, and me as a confused, lonely, grieving widow who had become paranoid and was being manipulated by a predatory lawyer seeking a payday. It was the exact narrative from the APS call, a prepackaged fiction, and it made my blood boil to hear it spoken in a court of law. Then it was Mr. Davies's turn. He stood up, calm and methodical, a comforting pillar of competence. He began to dismantle their lies piece by piece, with the cold, hard precision of a surgeon. He started with the promissory note. Your Honor, this was not a generous loan or a gift. It was a formal legal debt, signed and acknowledged by the defendants, a debt which they knowingly and intentionally ignored after the plaintiff's husband passed away. He then presented the private agreement. And this document, Your Honor, shows that the sale of the house was not a simple transaction. It was a fraudulent conveyance, a direct and willful breach of a contract they signed, a contract specifically designed to protect my client's financial security in her widowhood. Their lawyer leaped up, objecting, calling it an informal family paper with no legal standing, but Mr. Davies was ready. He called his first witness, Mr. Henry Abernathy. Leaning on his cane, Mr. Abernathy made his way to the stand with a slow, deliberate dignity. In a clear, unwavering voice that filled the courtroom, he confirmed the document's validity and then recounted, under oath, Eleanor's visit to his office years ago. He told the court about her veiled threats, her chilling suggestion that the document should be misplaced. The courtroom murmured. Judge Mendez leaned forward, her eyes narrowing into slits as she stared at Eleanor. Next came Brenda. She was a fantastic witness, direct, indignant, and completely unimpressed by the courtroom setting. I saw her, she said, pointing a firm, steady finger at Eleanor. She got right up in Carol's face, screaming at her, and then she hauled off and smacked her. No provocation. None at all. It was disgusting. Their lawyer tried to trip her up on cross-examination, suggesting her view was obstructed or that she was mistaken. Brenda just laughed. My view was perfect. And so is the view on my high-definition doorbell camera. Mr. Davies played the video on the large courtroom monitors. The ugly crack of the slap echoed through the silent room. Emily flinched violently and started to cry silently, her shoulders shaking. Mark sank so low in his chair he seemed to disappear. Eleanor's pious mask twitched, a crack appearing in the facade. Judge Mendez watched the screen, her expression like granite. The final act was the money. Mr. Davies presented the evidence of the Shell Corporation, EVM Enterprises, and called a forensic accountant to the stand. The accountant, a brisk, efficient woman, explained in simple, devastating terms how the money from the house sale had been laundered. $630,000 went into Emily and Mark's joint account. Within 24 hours, 2 massive transfers were made. One, for $300,000, went to a private brokerage account in Eleanor's name alone. The second, for $300,000, was wired to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, held by EVM Enterprises. And who are the registered officers of this corporation? Mr. Davies asked, his voice ringing with theatrical clarity. There is only one, the accountant replied, peering at her documents. An Eleanor Victoria Maxwell. The room erupted in whispers. Eleanor hadn't invested the money for them. She had stolen it, hiding half of it where she thought no one could ever find it. Judge Mendez banged her gavel for silence. She looked directly at Emily, her gaze sharp enough to cut glass. Miss Peterson Maxwell, the judge said, her voice sharp and devoid of sympathy. Did you authorize the transfer of $300,000 of your money to an offshore account registered to your mother-in-law? Emily looked from the judge to Eleanor, her face a mess of tears, confusion, and dawning horror. Eleanor said it was for taxes, for the investment fees. I signed the papers she gave me. She told me not to worry about the details. Her voice trailed off into a pathetic whimper. It was a confession of breathtaking stupidity and a level of misplaced trust that was almost criminal in itself. Judge Mendez stared at Eleanor for a long, hard moment, a predator sizing up her prey. Miss Maxwell, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Do you have an explanation for this offshore account? For the first time that day, Eleanor's legendary composure shattered. She opened her mouth but no sound came out. Her face, which had been a mask of pious indignation, crumpled. She was trapped. Her intricate web of lies had been torn apart, and she was caught in the middle, exposed and squirming under the bright, unforgiving lights of the law. In that moment of complete, crushing silence, I finally looked at my daughter. And for the first time in a very, very long time, she looked back at me, her eyes filled not with defiance or excuses, but with the dawning, catastrophic and absolute understanding of how completely she had been fooled. Judge Mendez didn't need to deliberate for long. After a short recess that felt like an eternity, she returned to the bench, her face a grim mask of judicial authority. The room was silent as a tomb. I held my breath, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Carol Peterson, on all counts, she declared, her voice ringing with a finality that brooked no argument. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. A wave of pure, unadulterated relief that made my knees feel weak. I felt Mr. Davies's hand briefly squeeze my shoulder. The judgment was swift and brutal. Judge Mendez was a woman who clearly had no patience for fraudsters. Emily and Mark were ordered to immediately repay the original $40,000 loan, plus 9 years of statutory interest. On top of that, they were held responsible for every penny of my legal fees. The sum was staggering, a crushing weight of debt that would likely take them years, if not decades, to repay. But the judge was just getting started. She turned her full, icy attention to Eleanor. As for you, Ms. Maxwell, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. This court finds that your actions constitute a clear and malicious pattern of financial elder abuse, fraud, undue influence, and civil assault. Your conduct has been, frankly, predatory and reprehensible. She issued an immediate freeze on all of Eleanor's known assets, including the brokerage account containing the first $300,000. She ordered a full forensic audit of EVM Enterprises and the offshore account, authorizing international cooperation to repatriate the stolen funds. And I am referring this entire case, she announced, looking pointedly at the district attorney's representative, who was sitting in the front row of the gallery, for criminal investigation on charges of felony fraud, theft by deception, and money laundering. I suggest you don't leave town, Ms. Maxwell. Finally, she granted me a permanent restraining order. Eleanor was forbidden from coming within 500 yards of me or my property, and from contacting me, directly or indirectly in any way, for the rest of her life. The gavel fell with a final echoing crack. It was over. The aftermath was chaos. Emily let out a gut-wrenching sob and collapsed forward, her head in her hands, her body shaking with uncontrollable weeping. Mark, looking like a ghost who had just been awakened, finally seemed to process the totality of their ruin. He turned to his mother, his face a mask of disbelief and raw rage. "You ruined us," he whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. "You ruined everything. You lied to us." Eleanor didn't even look at him. She just sat there, staring blankly ahead at the judge's empty bench, her face a pale, slack ruin. The puppet master had her strings cut, and she had collapsed into a heap. I didn't feel a surge of victory. I didn't feel the thrill of revenge. I just felt quiet. A deep, profound, and weary quiet that settled into my very bones. I had won, but what had I lost in the process? Mr. Davies patted my hand. "Justice, Carol," he said softly. "That's what this feels like." I stood up, gathered my purse and the blue folder, and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. I didn't want to see my daughter's tears or my son-in-law's despair. I didn't want to see Eleanor's downfall. I just wanted to go home. To my home. My safe, quiet home. The first thing I did when I walked through my front door was call a locksmith. An hour later, every lock in my house was new. The next day, I had a state-of-the-art security system installed, complete with cameras covering every entrance. It wasn't about fear. It was about reclaiming my space. It was about drawing a clear, undeniable line around my life. It was about ensuring my peace would never be shattered like that again. The house felt different. It felt lighter. Felt like mine again. I opened all the windows, letting the crisp autumn air chase out the last lingering ghosts of their presence. In the weeks that followed, Mr. Davies worked diligently to enforce the judgment. A large portion of the money was recovered from Eleanor's accounts. When the first check from the court-appointed receiver arrived, I stared at it for a long time. It felt like blood money, tainted with lies and betrayal and family heartbreak. I didn't want it in my bank account, so I decided to turn it into something good, something clean. I called the local high school and worked with the principal to set up the Frank Peterson Memorial Scholarship Fund, a grant for kids from low-income families who wanted to go into a trade, plumbing, electrical work, carpentry. I wanted Frank's legacy, his hard-earned money, to be about building things up, not tearing them down. Felt right. Felt like putting the world back in order. My phone rang often in those first few weeks. Blocked numbers. Numbers I didn't recognize. I never answered. One day a thick letter arrived. Emily's familiar, looping handwriting on the front. I held it for a long time, feeling the weight of the pages inside. Then, without opening it, I walked to the drawer where I keep my important papers and placed it inside. I wasn't ready. Maybe I never would be. The true victory, I realized, wasn't about winning in court or getting the money back. It was about the silence. It was about having the power to choose peace, to close the door on the chaos, and to finally be safe and respected in my own home. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I know so many of us have faced our own battles behind closed doors. My question for you is, have you ever had to make the painful choice to cut off a family member to protect your own peace? Let me know in the comments below. Reading your stories helps all of us feel a little less alone. And if my story resonated with you, please give this video a like and subscribe for more.